Well, you're damn right. We are targeting your community. We are. And by your community, the community we're targeting, I'm referring to the community of child abusers.
Girls between the ages of like 17 and 24 is when they're technically most fertile.
Yeah.
Okay?
Matt Walsh is a Daily Wire host who advocates for the execution of doctors who give gender-affirming care. In late October of 2022, Matt Walsh hosted a rally in Tennessee against gender-affirming care. Here's a look at the crowd that Matthew attracts. If the death threats against doctors wasn't enough of a red flag, maybe the presence of extremist group Proud Boys will be enough to raise some concern. Now, Matt has a long history of advocating for violent measures being taken to silence his opponents. For example, Matt has publicly stated that police should be breaking down doors of drag events and charging all involved as pedophiles, also stating we have to be all the more aggressive. And I noticed that whenever he's called out on his extremist views, he falls back onto the same excuse of wanting to protect the children. Everything he does is for the children, as he says numerous times.
I use it for the purpose of trying to protect children from being castrated and mutilated. That's one of the things I try to do, drawing attention to the fact that this is happening to children. I know you seem to find it very amusing. I don't.
For a guy who's all about protecting children, it's strange that he'd be repulsed by teaching kids the importance of what appropriate and inappropriate physical contact might look like.
Those books are bad too, but don't get me wrong, but this one disturbs me on a deeper level.
I want to plead guilty.
Shut up!
It's also more strange to think that this is the same dude who refers to young women as fertile, and who thinks the only problem with teen pregnancy is unwed teen pregnancy. Right, the only problem with a girl being pregnant at 15 years old is that she doesn't have a nice, strong, adult man to marry her. Today we're going to be looking at some of these bizarre takes from Matt Walsh, but before we get into that, I want to thank today's sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. No, I'm totally fucking with you, but could you imagine? No, first we're gonna be looking at just one more video about consent done by Matt Walsh, because as we learned in our last video, Matt Walsh thinks asking if he can touch you is asinine. So let's get into it.
A freelance writer for the New York Times and for some other publications as well. Her name is Susanna Weiss. And according to her bio, she specializes in feminism, sex, and psychonautics. I don't know what psychonautics are, but you kind of get a general impression of what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, Matt has this habit of talking about things he doesn't really understand, despite the answers being fairly easy to acquire.
Can you give us a summary of your educational background or your healthcare education experience?
Now, it's true, I didn't go to college, but I did go to school long enough to learn how to read.
That's why he made a whole documentary on what it means to be a woman. Even though this person he was interviewing in the documentary was the perfect person to get an actual answer from, but instead of listening, as we see, he just kind of ignores everything for, well, I don't know, a joke, I guess?
That's cool. He's just fast forwarding through his discussion. He's like, yeah, I don't really care about that because, you know, you're actually describing things.
It's just very telling to see Matt Walsh make a joke out of something rather than just Googling it or asking somebody so he can get a better understanding of what it is before, you know, making a documentary.
And she recently attempted to basically instruct the unwashed Twitter masses about the intricacies of consent. And the main thing Weiss wanted us to know is that consent is necessary in every sexual encounter, even if it's a sexual encounter via text message.
Yeah, no shit, Sherlock.
General rule of thumb, guys. If you plan on being explicit with someone, maybe ask them before doing anything. Actually, definitely ask them before doing anything.
Touch. Don't touch.
On our last video on Matt, he made asking for consent seem like this very robotic, weird thing to do, when in reality it's as simple as, hey, does this make you uncomfortable? Oh, does it? Oh, okay, I'll stop. I'm sorry. I know you find it absurd to have to ask a girl if you can send a dick pic instead of just jumping in her DMs guns a-blazing, but yeah, you do have to ask, and that's why in the state of California, sending a PNG of your Walsh wiener can be treated as a misdemeanor or a felony, meaning you could do 6 months in jail or be fined up to $1,000. And I gotta be real with you, if you disagree with there being punishments for spamming dick pics at complete strangers, you're probably a sick fuck. Like, I cannot lie, bro.
So Weiss tweeted, she said, ask consent for all sexual encounters. Yes, even sexting. I just came up with this script. You're all welcome to borrow. And her script has the would-be sexter saying, I've been having some sexual thoughts about you. I'd like to share over text if you'd enjoy that. That's the opening line. That's how you get consent.
Yeah. Isn't it hilarious asking for consent?
Now, what do you do? She doesn't get into this, but what do you do if you open with that and then you get back, instead of okay smiley face, you get back like a K with a period? just K period.
And this is one of the big problems I have with Matthew, right? This insistence on trivializing something serious for the sake of a quick laugh. In this other video, he goes on and on about how the usage of the word sexual assault is too broad and trivializes actual sexual assault. Yes, we're now gatekeeping sexual assault, according to Matthew Walsh.
We don't have any meaningful way to describe it because the word consent has become
Today, Junior,
is increasingly means nothing because we've expanded it so much.
Yes, this is something he said. And yes, we'll be talking about this one in the near future. But isn't it strange that the guy gatekeeping the word sexual assault is also the guy who jokes about attaining consent before a sexual encounter? Here he is talking about how weird and absurd it is to have to ask if they're comfortable with this explicit conversation, but then goes on to say, wow, we really need to take sexual assault victims more seriously.
Now, there are, of course, a number of problems here. The first and most obvious problem is that the sexter, in this case, comes across like Spock, or maybe a vaguely self-aware robot. You know, like, greetings, life form, requesting permission to initiate robotic, erotic communication sequence.
Requesting permission to initiate physical interaction.
permission granted.
Aw, sweet, the same joke nearly 2 years later. You can tell that Matthew still writes his own material because it's still dog shit. And like, yeah, the script is dry, but it's not supposed to be a guide on how to absolutely crush liberal pussy numbnuts. It's an example. Like I said earlier, asking about consent isn't always, do I have consent to touch you, bro? It's as easy as, hey, is this okay? Should we stop? Am I making you uncomfortable? There are plenty of ways to go about it, but it's in his nature to be unsatisfied with an answer that isn't quite to his liking.
And secondly, we have a sort of chicken and egg problem here. Because if you don't, you didn't have permission to think sexually about the other person in the first place. And you certainly didn't have permission to ask permission to share the thoughts that you're having.
I don't know, Matthew. Are you walking up to complete strangers and telling them that you were thinking of them naked? Do you want me to say it's immoral of you to think of someone sexually without their consent? Because that's not what I'm gonna say, and that's not what we're talking about here. What you do in your head is your business. I don't want to fucking know, all right? However, it gets completely different when you choose to walk up to someone and share that you've been having these thoughts with them completely out of the blue.
The eye contact makes her uncomfortable, and authorities are contacted.
Matthew is trying to complicate something so simple by adding all these steps to it, when the thing we're talking about here really boils down to, hey, be pleasant around people. To be fair though, that must be extremely challenging for someone like Matt Walsh.
So I think a real sexting with consent script would have to begin with a neutral greeting, something like hello, and then work its way very slowly over many pages and hundreds of introductory questions to the sexting request.
Yeah, Matt Walsh wants a deep, complex lure to understand the intricacies of asking someone if he's making them uncomfortable. You see, guys, the real joke here is the idea that Matt Walsh would ask for consent in the first place.
The idea that verbal consent should precede every physical interaction is asinine.
Now, on this channel, the videos of Matt Walsh we've seen have been pretty recent, as in within the last 3 years or so. But what if I told you that the internet got its greasy little tendrils on Matt's content from around a decade ago? I know, big shock. I thought Matthew was just some guy that spawned in the Daily Wire offices shortly after Ben Shapiro popped off. But it seems that Matt Walsh has actually always been a political commentator. In the early 2010s, Matt was also a talk show radio host. Well, co-host. And it was during this time that he said some pretty, questionable things that may or may not have come back to haunt him.
I do not apologize. In fact, by all rights, you sick freaks should be the ones apologizing to me.
Okay, maybe it doesn't haunt him, but it should, right? Now, this small clip we're gonna be looking at is from one of those radio broadcasts, which aired about 10-ish years ago, meaning that Matt Walsh was around 25 when he was saying this stuff. So let's listen to a 25-year-old Matt Walsh explain to us why girls in their teens are more fertile and ready for pregnancy. Fuck me, dude. Shit.
It is not. In fact, ever since the beginning of time, teenage girls have been getting pregnant. It used to be more common. The peak, ever since they started keeping records of these things, which they only started doing recently, like in the 20th century, but ever since they started keeping records, in 1957 was the peak for teenage pregnancy. 1957. So to all of a sudden act like this phenomenon of girls getting pregnant at a young age that we consider young, 16 or 17, to act like it's a new thing is ridiculous. It's always been that way.
Gee, I wonder why so many teenagers were getting pregnant in the 1950s. Could it have anything to do with teen marriages being much higher than they are right now? Obviously, teenagers have been getting pregnant since the dawn of time. No shit, right? But to claim that it's ridiculous that people are surprised by a sudden uptick of teen pregnancy is, well, ridiculous. Considering how sharp the decline in teen pregnancies have been over the last 70 years, it's even more shocking to see a teen mother in this current age, actually. Especially when you consider that teens have easier access to things like condoms, birth control, and abortion. You know, that thing that Matthew thinks is immoral. It's just weird that Matthew and so many other conservatives are hellbent on outlawing this procedure when it's played such a huge role in reducing the amount of teenage parents we have here in the States. Now, there are plenty of reasons as to why teenagers should have easier access to an abortion, but that's an argument that conservatives are never going to be able to sit down and have. Even the idea of a conservative like Matt Walsh sitting down to discuss abortion is a far cry from reality. Moving on.
Even biologically, and this is me just stating, I'm going to start by just stating facts. So fact number 1, it's not a new phenomenon. Fact number 2, in fact, it's a phenomenon that was more common earlier in history, and for, the first 6,000 to 10,000 years of human existence, it was a normal thing. Fact 3, girls between the ages of like 17 and 24 is when they're technically most fertile.
Yeah.
Okay? That's biological. That's a fact, all right? I'm just stating facts. That's all I'm doing.
What is this obsession with men in their 20s referring to young women as fertile? I don't fucking get it. Well, it's just a fact. Well, it's still fucking creepy, dude. She's a person, not soil on your farm. Now, listen, I've been deep in the pits of the red-pilled abyss, and this line is repeated over and over again. This line of women hit the wall at age 30. Women are fertile in their teens and early 20s. Women don't age as well as men. Why is this the shit you guys think about all the fucking time? Anytime I see this shit brought up, I just assume that the person saying it is a MGTOW and also lives with their mom. And actually, looking at some of Matthew's recent uploads, I'm starting to get a hint of some red-pilled ideas. Yeah, the channel reeks of Cool Ranch Doritos and Chronic League of Legends. Sorry for going off topic there, but referring to girls as fertile is just creepy as shit. My advice on getting girls to like you, stop talking like that.
But what happened recently, and this is the 4th fact, recently in the last 30 years or so, we decided that that's way too young to start a family.
Why?
And because the problem is not per se teenage pregnancy, it's unwed pregnancy. That's the problem in society. It's only problematic when you are not married and you don't have the man there to help you take care of the kids because he's a coward.
Matthew, you fucking cunt. Matthew sees a pregnant middle schooler and thinks, oh God, how sad. I don't see a wedding ring on her.
So then you would marry a 13-year-old girl because she's really cool and you could have sex.
After a while, if it worked out, yeah.
Now, I shouldn't have to tell you this, but the problem with teenage pregnancy is the pregnancy. I know creeps like Matthew will go on and on about how fertile younger women are, but that's ignoring the issues that teen pregnancy presents, which, among other things, includes a higher chance of infant mortality. Let me remind you here, conservatives don't want teenage victims of sexual assault to have access to an abortion, right? And as an added fuck you, there's a higher chance that the baby might not even make it in the first place. Imagine you're that teenage girl, that teenage victim of assault, and some random douchebag in his mid-30s is forcing you to carry out that full pregnancy term, right? And now you have to deal with the trauma of that baby being a stillborn. You're gonna have to carry that for the rest of your fucking life because this guy and an army of people like this guy have taken away your right to take control of your own life again. That's not even mentioning all these other high-stress situations this teenager is now thrusted into. How is she going to finish school? How is she going to support her child? Who's going to support her? The fuck does it matter if she's married or not? Oh, thank you, husband, who is also a teenager. Hopefully you'll be able to provide for us by flipping more burgers after school. Thank you, husband. Mwah. Unless Matthew is implying that teen mothers need a man as in an adult man, as in a grown man, as in younger girls marrying older men who's socially acceptable, as in a... I'm calling the police. And as if all of that wasn't strange enough, right? Someone managed to find an old blog post by Matt from 2013. The guy that thinks the true problem with teen pregnancy is unwed pregnancy also thinks that adolescence is a modern plague. He goes on to explain this line of thinking in this blog post appropriately titled Adolescence, a Modern Plague. But there is a cure. Child psychologists have discovered that adolescence actually ends not at age 18, but at age 25. Once again, psychologists have waved their wands and magically created a larger customer base. But maybe I'm being cynical. Maybe adolescence really does end at 25. Or is it 18? Or is it 40? 35? 50? 12? 2? 93? I think the answer is yes and no. So clearly conservatives have been ignoring what doctors have been saying since way before 2020. Good to know. Now all of this is something I would expect to hear from an angsty teenager who feels that they're ready to be an adult because they feel so mature for their age. You know the type. But coming from a 25-year-old Matt Walsh, this sounds a lot like someone trying to say as subtly as possible that the age of consent is too high. Now you may be thinking, wow, what an absurd thing to say. How about I read this line to you? In Catholicism, the sacrament of confirmation is usually administered between the ages of 12 and 15. Once confirmed, you are officially a full-fledged adult member of the church. In Judaism, 12 and 13-year-olds celebrate their bat or bar mitzvah, a coming-of-age ritual where they pass from a child to an accountable adult. Virtually every culture has its own child into adult initiation, and almost all of them happen significantly before their 18th birthday. This sounds an awful lot like the guy who watches on porn and defends it by saying, the age of consent in Japan is actually 14, so it's totally normal to have a crush on Klee from Genshin Impact. Now for all of the Matt Walsh fans who've made it this far into the video, all three of you, first of all, congratulations. Second, I need you to imagine these words coming out of a drag queen's mouth. I need you to imagine a drag queen is calling adolescence a modern plague and bringing up how in other civilizations, kids are actually considered adults at much younger ages than here in the West. Now back to reality, it's not a drag queen saying all this. It's Matt Walsh, the guy who constantly claims that he's leading this harassment campaign against the LGBTQ because he wants to protect the children. The guy who's repulsed by consent being taught to children. The guy who held an anti-trans rally with this sign front and center. The guy who thinks it's asinine that he has to ask for consent before touching you is the same fucking guy who called adolescence a modern plague. Thank you for watching. Holy shit, that was a hard one. I want to take this time to apologize to my loyal viewers for uploading 2 Matt Walsh videos in a row. I know this channel started off as like an anti-MGTOW thing, but lately my attention has been going to Daily Wire and like semi-political stuff, mainly because I think it's kind of important, and if I don't share it here in like this video format, then I'm probably gonna lose my mind from suppressing all these angry thoughts. This video was actually gonna be a lot longer originally, but I decided to save some of that material for another day, so yes, there will be another Matt Walsh video sometime soon because my god, this guy cannot stop taking L's. However, to make it up to you, my next video will be on Taylor the Fiend. It's kind of an older script that I wrote right before my content started slowing down, but I think it'll be fine. And with all of that being said, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Peace.